He said he wanted forever with me, but forever had a door he'd never let me open. I used to think secrets destroyed love. Now, I know, sometimes they're what keep it alive. My name is Clara Bennett, and for a long time, I believed I had finally found the kind of love that songs are written about. Gentle, patient, the kind that feels like home after too many storms. His name was Ethan Ward, a man who could fix anything, except the pieces of himself he'd buried too deep. We met on a gray afternoon when the rain smelled like rust and nostalgia. I was buying a cracked picture frame at a flea market. He was bent over an old pocket watch that refused to tick, his fingers trembling just slightly, like he was afraid to make time move again. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Some things are worth fixing, even when they're not yours." That's how it began. A love that felt fragile and sacred all at once. We built everything together. Plans, laughter, late-night coffee dreams, everything. Except roots. Because there was one thing he never allowed me to touch. His past. Every time I asked about his family, he'd say with a quiet half-smile, "Some stories are better left in the past." But the longer I stayed, the more I felt it, the weight of an invisible wall between us. And behind that wall, something was aching. The night he proposed, he slipped the ring on my finger with shaking hands. But instead of joy, I felt a question bloom inside me like a bruise. Why did the man who wanted to build a life with me never want me to meet the people who built him? Before I tell you what I discovered, tell me in the comments, have you ever loved someone who hid part of their story from you? And don't forget to subscribe, because the truth behind Ethan's silence was nothing I could have imagined. People think silence is peaceful, but when you love someone who hides behind it, silence feels like standing in a room filling slowly with water. You can't breathe, but you smile anyway. At first, I told myself Ethan was just private, maybe even shy about his past. We'd been together almost a year then, long enough to know his favorite coffee, his sleeping habits, the way he'd hum under his breath whenever he was deep in thought. But not long enough, apparently, to know who made him that way. I remember the first time I brought up his family seriously. We were lying on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by half-open boxes of wedding magazines. I asked playfully, "Do you think your mom would like lilacs for the ceremony?" He froze, actually froze, like someone had pressed pause on him. Then, quietly, he said, "I don't think she'd care much about flowers." And that was it. He stood up, kissed my forehead, and changed the subject to flooring options. After that, I stopped asking. But it didn't stop hurting. Because every photo we took together, every plan we made, felt like it had an invisible frame around it. One labeled, "Not the whole picture." Sometimes, I'd wake up at night and watch him sleep. His brow would twitch, like he was dreaming of something heavy. Once, he whispered a name. Noah. I never asked who it was. I was too afraid of the answer. Then, one morning, I found him sitting on the balcony, just staring at the skyline. The sun hadn't even risen yet. I said his name, and he flinched, like I'd pulled him out of a place I wasn't supposed to see. That's when I realized. The man I loved didn't just keep secrets, he lived inside them. And soon, I was going to find out exactly what and who he'd left behind. It started with a map and a lie. Ethan had once mentioned a name, Willow Creek, when we were talking about childhood places. He said it so quickly, like it slipped out by mistake.
That single word stayed with me, tucked between my ribs, humming like a secret too heavy to carry. So one weekend, while he thought I was visiting my sister in Portland, I packed a small bag, filled the car with gas, and drove 3 hours north to a town that, according to him, barely existed anymore. Willow Creek was the kind of place that looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. Paint peeled from the sides of buildings, the air smelled faintly of dust and pine. There was one diner, one gas station, and a main street that ended at a row of old houses with sagging porches. I half expected the ghosts to wave back. I asked the woman at the diner, a kind, heavy-set lady named Ruth, if she knew an Ethan Ward. She frowned, tapping her finger against her chin. "Ward," she murmured. "Can't say I do. There was a couple of boys by that name years back. Foster kids, I think. Left after the accident." My throat tightened. "What accident?" But before she could answer, a man called from the kitchen, and she turned away. I sat there, staring at my untouched coffee, feeling like I'd just stepped into a story I wasn't supposed to read. When I walked back to my car, I noticed something across the street. An old building with faded paint that read, "Willow Creek Home for Children." The gate was locked, but through the fence, I saw a mural on the wall. 2 boys holding hands beneath a tree. And scrawled underneath, barely visible through the dirt, were the words, "Someday we'll build a home." That's when I knew. Ethan's silence wasn't hiding shame, it was hiding ghosts, and I wasn't leaving until I met them.
The orphanage looked abandoned, but memory never really leaves a place like that. The front door creaked open when I pushed, groaning like an old wound. Inside, dust floated in the air like faint ghosts of laughter that once lived there. Faded drawings lined the walls, suns with crooked smiles, stick figures holding hands, skies colored in with too much blue. I shouldn't have gone inside, but love makes trespassers of us all. In what used to be the playroom, I found a small table stacked with forgotten boxes. Most were empty. Brittle paper, old toys, broken crayons. Then, in the bottom of one, I saw it. A photograph. 2 boys, maybe 6 and 10, standing under a tree. The older one had Ethan's eyes, the same soft, cautious gaze, and the younger boy was grinning so hard you could almost hear it. Across the bottom, written in a child's messy scrawl, were the words, "Someday we'll build a home." I sat on the floor, staring at it until the light began to fade. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Are you lost?" The voice was small, fragile, belonging to a little girl with dark curls and eyes too old for her face. I'm just visiting," I said. "Do you live here?" She nodded. "My name's Leela. You're holding Noah's picture." My heart stopped. "Noah?" She pointed to the smiling boy. "That's him. He used to talk about his brother all the time. Said they'd find each other again one day." "Do you know what happened to him?" I whispered. Leela looked down, her voice barely a breath. "He almost did, but then the car didn't stop in time." The photograph shook in my hands. And in that moment, I understood. Ethan wasn't running from his family. He was running from a promise that death had stolen. And now, I had to decide if I was ready to hand him back his ghosts. The sky was starting to turn gray when I left the orphanage, the photograph still trembling in my hands. I sat in my car, staring at the faces of those 2 boys, Ethan and Noah, and wondered how long a heart could carry that kind of loss before it breaks in silence. Leela had told me about a woman named Mrs. Givens, who used to run the home. She lived on the edge of town now, in a small white house surrounded by overgrown roses.
When she opened the door, she looked at me with that cautious kindness people reserve for strangers who might be bringing bad news. "I think you knew someone I love, Ethan Ward." Her eyes softened instantly. "Oh, Ethan," she sighed. "He was a quiet one, always watching over his brother. You could tell he felt like a little parent himself." She invited me in, poured tea that smelled faintly of mint and old summers. Then she said, almost to herself, "Noah adored him, drew pictures of them together every day, said they'd build a home where no one could send them away again." I swallowed hard. "What happened to him?" Her hands trembled as she set the cup down. "There was a storm. The foster system had separated them again. Noah ran away, trying to find Ethan. They found him by the bridge the next morning." The air felt heavy, like the world itself bowed its head. Mrs. Givens looked at me then, eyes glistening. When Ethan came back years later, he stood where it happened. Didn't say a word, just left a small box under the tree. Said it was for Noah, in case he ever came home. I pressed the photograph against my chest, feeling the weight of his grief as if it were my own. Ethan hadn't built walls to keep me out. He'd built them to survive.
That now I had a choice, to stay outside them or find a way in. And love, real love, doesn't knock. It walks through. When I got back home, the city lights looked different, sharper somehow, like they knew something I didn't the day before. Ethan was sitting on the couch when I walked in, surrounded by blueprints for the house we were supposed to build. He looked up, smiled softly, but there was worry in it. He could feel it, the change in the air between us. "Hey," he said carefully, "you're home early." "Yeah," I replied, setting my bag down. My hands were trembling. I went somewhere." He studied me. Silence stretched thin between us, the way it always did when truth was close enough to touch. "Ethan," I whispered, pulling the photograph from my coat pocket. "Who is Noah?" The color drained from his face. He didn't reach for the photo, just stared at it like it might burn him. His voice broke when he finally spoke. "Where did you find that?" "I went to Willow Creek." I said it softly, but it landed like thunder. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he exhaled, covering his face with his hands. "I didn't want you to see that place." "Why?" He looked at me, eyes red, wet, and so tired. "Because that's where I stopped being a brother. Because I promised him we'd build a home one day. And I never did." His words fell like stones in the quiet. He told me everything then, about the night Noah ran away, the years spent searching, the guilt that lived inside his bones, how he'd spent his life fixing things because he couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. When he finished, there were tears running down his face. Not loud, not desperate, just silent, steady grief finally let loose. I reached out, took his hands, and said the only thing that felt true. "Then maybe it's time we build that home together." He looked at me, and for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt like peace beginning. 2 days later, I asked him to take a drive. No questions, no explanations, just trust me. He nodded, and that was enough. We drove out of the city before sunrise. The world outside was still half asleep, mist rising off the fields, the sky bruised with early light. Ethan's hands gripped the wheel tight, his jaw set. but his eyes kept flicking toward me, searching for a reason he couldn't yet name. When we reached the empty lot where we'd planned to build our future home, he stopped the car. The ground was soft with morning dew, the air filled with the faint scent of cedar and earth. "What are we doing here?" he asked quietly. I reached into my bag and handed him the photograph. Maybe this is where that promise finally begins. He stared at it for a long time. His thumb brushed over the faded ink, the words, "Someday we'll build a home." Then he crouched down, touched the soil, and whispered, "He would have loved this place." We planted a small sapling in the center of the lot, a maple, its roots thin and trembling like they were afraid of the world they were entering. Ethan pressed the dirt around it carefully, almost reverently, as if he were tucking Noah into bed one last time. I stood beside him, the wind cool against my face, and felt something shift, a quiet forgiveness, both given and received. He turned to me, eyes full of tears, but finally unafraid. "Thank you," he said, "for finding me before I was ready to be found." I smiled. "No, you were never lost. You were just waiting for home to catch up." And as the sun broke over the horizon, I realized love doesn't erase the past. It roots itself inside it, growing toward the light anyway. It's been a year since we planted that tree. The house is still unfinished, a work in progress, like us. But sometimes I think that's the point. Maybe love isn't about building something perfect. Maybe it's about building something that remembers. Ethan spends most mornings on the porch now, sanding down old wood, mending frames, restoring what others gave up on. There's always music playing softly from the radio, an old habit, he says, from the days when silence felt too heavy. I watch him sometimes, sunlight catching the scar on his wrist, and think about how far we've come from that quiet, broken man who couldn't look back without breaking. Now he looks back with gentleness, like the past is a place he's finally made peace with. The maple tree stands taller every day, its leaves spreading wide, as if reaching for something unseen. We named it Noah's tree. Every fall we hang a small wooden tag from one of its branches, a promise we've kept, a memory we've healed, a piece of us that's still learning to grow. Sometimes Ethan kneels beside it and whispers things I'll never ask him to repeat. And that's okay, because some silences aren't walls anymore. They're prayers. I used to believe love was about finding someone who completed you. Now, I know it's about finding someone who helps you build, brick by brick, memory by memory, until even the pain becomes part of the foundation. We don't heal by forgetting. We heal by building something that remembers and still chooses love. If this story touched your heart, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Possible Hearts, where every story reminds us real stories, real hearts, real possibilities.